You didn't lose your dreams. You learned to stop wanting them. Not all at once. Not in a single moment of giving up. It happened gradually, the way most important things happen, through small decisions, small disappointments, small moments of reaching and not quite receiving, until reaching itself started to feel like the problem. And so you stopped, not because you no longer had wants, but because wanting had started to cost more than you could afford. There is a particular kind of loss that nobody talks about. Not the loss of people, not the loss of relationships, or opportunities, or things you can point to and say, this is what I lost. But the loss of wanting itself, the quiet disappearance of the part of you that reached toward things, that had preferences, desires, a sense of what a good life might feel like for you specifically. And this loss is hard to name because it doesn't arrive as grief. It arrives as practicality, as maturity, as finally understanding how things work. You tell yourself, I'm just more realistic now. I've learned not to expect too much. I'm easier to please than I used to be. But beneath that practicality, something real was lost. And this is about what it was. For most people, this begins earlier than they realize, not necessarily with one dramatic moment, but with a pattern that formed before they had words to describe it. You wanted something, as a child, as a young person, as someone just learning what it meant to have needs, and the response you received taught you something about the safety of wanting. Maybe the want was dismissed. You don't need that. That's not realistic. Why do you always want more? Maybe it was met with disappointment. Not cruelty, just the quiet letdown of reaching, and finding the reaching was not returned. Maybe the environment simply didn't have space for what you wanted. And you being perceptive, being sensitive to what the room required, made yourself smaller, put the want away, told yourself it wasn't that important anyway, and that worked. The friction decreased, things became smoother, and you learned, in the wordless way children learn things, that wanting less made life easier. The pattern didn't stay in childhood, it followed you into friendships, where your preferences consistently came last, and you let them, because asking felt like an imposition, into relationships, where what you wanted was consistently less important than what they needed, and you adjusted, because adjusting had always been your role, into versions of your life that were built more around what was expected of you than around what you actually desired, because desire itself had started to feel like something you weren't fully entitled to. And the wants didn't disappear. They went somewhere quieter, into the part of you that you didn't show people, the part that noticed things and felt things and wished for things, but had learned to do all of that very privately, very carefully, without letting it show too much. Because letting it show meant risking disappointment. And disappointment, by this point, was something you had become very practiced at avoiding. The things you stopped wanting were not small things. They looked small. They were presented to yourself as small, as things that didn't really matter, that you were probably better off without, that weren't worth the trouble of pursuing, but they were not small. You stopped wanting to be truly known by someone, because being truly known required letting someone close enough to know you, and closeness had taught you that it came with conditions. You stopped wanting to be chosen first, not in competition with anyone, just unchosen, without having to earn it, without having to make yourself the most convenient option, just wanted, for no reason other than being you. You stopped wanting things for yourself, experiences, ambitions, a life that felt designed around your actual preferences, rather than around what seemed acceptable to want. And you stopped wanting to believe that things could be different, because believing had started to feel like the most expensive thing of all. The cost of stopping wanting is not always visible. It shows up in a life that functions well, but doesn't quite feel like yours. In a version of yourself that is capable and reliable, but somehow hollow in places you can't quite point to. It shows up in the distance between what you do each day and what you would choose if choosing felt safe. In the flatness that settles over things, the way joy arrives at a slight remove, the way enthusiasm feels effortful, the way you watch other people want things with their whole bodies and feel something between recognition and grief. Because you remember wanting like that, or you almost remember it, a version of yourself who reached toward things without first calculating the cost of being disappointed. That version did not disappear. It did not stop wanting. It simply learned, through enough repetition, through enough disappointment, through enough environments that did not have room for it, to want more quietly. Here is what is still true. The wanting did not leave. It went somewhere safer, somewhere internal, somewhere it could exist without being subject to the judgment, the disappointment, the quiet withdrawal that had taught you it was safer to keep it hidden. But it is still there. You can feel it. In the moments when something catches you off guard, a piece of music that gets somewhere in you, before you can stop it, a conversation that makes you feel more like yourself than you have in a long time, a moment of beauty that lands before your defenses do. Those moments are not accidents. They are the wanting, finding the gaps in the careful life you built to keep it from mattering too much. It never stopped mattering. You just stopped letting yourself know that. If you have spent years not letting yourself want things, I want to offer you something small. Not a prescription, not an instruction to start wanting differently, just this. The things you stopped letting yourself want were not unreasonable. They were not too much. They were not evidence that you were difficult, or demanding, or impossible to satisfy. They were just yours, the specific shape of what a good life would feel like for you. And that shape is still there. Underneath the practicality, underneath the years of adjustment and accommodation, and telling yourself you didn't need much, it is still there, waiting, not with impatience, not with accusation, but with the quiet persistence of something that was always meant to belong to you. It still is.